Hello and welcome to the Dadler Soul Sessions. It is a Thursday night, the 26th of January, 2023. It feels like January's been going on for 300 years, but it's 5 days away from ending, which, is great news for most people if you've got a tax return still to do. Terrible news. It's funny how that happens at this time of year. Anyway, that's all irrelevant. It's the Dadler Soul Sessions. Got a great show for you tonight. We're talking to Jacqui Champagne. She is researching into depression in new dads, and she wants to talk about that. It's been a fascinating subject to talk about. Alex is our conflict management expert. He is here at about 8:45, 9:50. He's going to be answering your questions about conflict management. We've had a few sent in. You can send some more in. Use the comments wherever you're watching: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. It's completely up to you. And we've got Sam Delaney as well, brilliant journalist, broadcaster. You will know all about him. He's also written a book called Sort Your Head Out. It's mental health without all the bollocks. And he does a podcast called The Reset, and he does a load of other stuff as well. And it'll be great to chat to him, catch up with him, and find out how he's doing as well. That's all coming up a little bit later on. First of all, though, this is a chat I recorded yesterday with the founder of Dadler Soul, Dan Flanagan, just to give you a little update on what we're doing at Dadler Soul. It's the Dadler Soul Sessions, and here is the king of Dadler Soul, the emperor of Dadler Soul, the dear beloved leader. Dan, how you doing?
I prefer Grandpa Simpson.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I realised before over Christmas we obviously got married because we've got the same surname.
There you go, exactly. Or it's nepotism. I'm your nephew.
That is, you're like Tom Hanks's son.
Yeah,
and got a job in, they call him Otto or whatever the film's. Have you seen that, by the way?
No, I've not seen a film for years, like a proper film at the cinema and stuff. No.
Yeah, actually, this part of my New Year's resolution is to go to pictures regularly, and there is a beautiful Tom Hanks film that's came out called My Name is Otto, and it's about a widower that's very, very grumpy, and a new Spanish family move in beside him and change his life. But part of the film is he does flashbacks, and it's Colin Hanks, who's Tom Hanks' son, plays him.
Oh, clever.
So that is nepotism.
That really is. Yeah.
But you have to play your dad.
Yeah, that's true, which is weird because then you try and do like method acting and follow your dad around while he's doing his daily jobs and stuff like that.
But his daily job is Tom Hanks.
Yeah, no, good point. Good point. Yeah.
Isn't it? 1 minute you're on an island talking to a football.
Yeah.
And then you're sleeping in an airport. Where'd you pick up?
Yeah, that's a tough one to follow, isn't it? Yeah, no. Yeah. Fair play to Colin, I think. He's putting in the hard hours there if he's keeping up with his dad.
Must have been the casting couch must have been a difficult conversation, wasn't it?
What I love about before we started this conversation, we're like, oh, let's keep it short and tight so we've got, enough time for all the guests. And we've just spent 2 minutes talking about Colin Hanks.
The world needs more Colin Hanks. He's got terrible teeth for a movie star, though.
I've not even noticed. See, I mean, he was probably in like junior school last time I went to the cinema, so I don't know.
Okay, well, make it a resolution to go to the pictures. It's a lovely thing. Anyway, we're not here to talk about. We should do a monthly movie session. Like be Barry Norman.
Not just a monthly Colin Hanks section. See what he's got up to. Oh, he went to Waitrose. That was nice. Yeah.
Thanks with Hanks, we could call it.
Perfect. There we go.
There's a few
tell us about.
Go on.
I was just going to say, tell us about Dadler Soul. What are we doing? What's going on with the organisation?
What's going on? Lots of things. So we are back like a renegade master, but a renegade master with slightly achy knees. So we kicked off in Brighton a couple of weeks ago at the lovely Plus X section. Amazing news. They've extended our contract because initially we were going to do sort of 6 months and test the water. But they're so happy with the results. The fact that we're getting over 100 people there every session. We had the BBC down. So if anybody caught hold of that, there was Sam, Jaden and Stuart that were chatting very nicely to a local BBC reporter. We are back this Saturday in Worthing for our play dates. We had our Dads Only session last week. And I think the biggest thing we've got going on, lots of new partnerships. So new venues, potentially in Shoreham and Lewis. Ideally, we want another 6 or 7 clubs by the end of the year. Just depends on the funding. But some really interesting conversations, including one with a hospital charity that look after severely ill children that are in there for a long time. They realise that they probably haven't supported dads. You know, if you're unfortunately your child's in hospital for 6-8 months, whatever, there's a huge level of stress there. But they realise that maybe they could do something more. There's a really interesting conversation that started working with dads that are ex-offenders that are coming out of prison, and how they can re-communicate, I suppose, for want of words, and get back in touch with their kids. And then another one with a historical charity. So they've got some beautiful sites that you would have read about in primary school in the history books. Can't say exactly who they are because it hasn't been signed off. But the idea there is to do almost like some horrible history stuff. So we bring history to life with the technology. So for anybody that hasn't been to our play dates, we have a couple of VR headsets. So I thought it'd be really interesting to put the headsets on the kids, go back in time to find out, you know, what it was like in the court of Henry VIII while being at one of those venues.
Nice.
And then we'll look at the ghosts and the ghouls coming out, maybe some beheadings, you know, all the sort of thing you want on a Saturday with your children.
Yes, that's what kids love. That's the best bit about history, right?
Exactly, the chopping off of the head. And maybe we do some reenactments if some dads are actually feeling game.
Fair enough. Can we just put a disclaimer out there? We're not going to chop any dads' heads off.
Said who? I did not see the facts. No.
Oh, okay.
No, I love the idea of bringing sort of art and technology, which are two of our pillars that we normally work with other areas, whether that be nature or history, and get some new audience for the venues, have some really sort of inspiring conversations. And then it's, new podcasts are coming up. So the series 2 of Maybe I'm Just Like Father. So if anybody didn't listen to that, it's on our Mixcloud channels, iTunes, and that's where we interviewed 5 or 6 dads within the arts. It was stand-up comedians, graffiti artists, DJs, or rapper, about their stories and their relationships with their own dads. And we got some really quite potent and heartbreaking stories coming out of some individuals that you probably wouldn't imagine that they'd gone through stuff like that. And lots of new volunteers. We're still looking for more volunteers. So if you want to get involved, you don't have to live in Sussex. Like Jim lives in Yorkshire, and we've never actually been within 5 foot of each other. Well, not since the restraining order, obviously.
I was going to say that's legally binding, isn't it? So
it is legally binding. But we've got a great show tonight, haven't we? Got some really interesting guests coming up.
We have. And Sam Delaney, who is sort of the main guest at the end of the show, he interviewed you recently. So I just wondered if you had a question for him that I could put to him later. Have you anything you'd like to ask him?
What would I like? What's the reaction he's had while wearing his Dad the Soul sweatshirt that we sent him?
Oh, very nice. I will put that to him a little bit later on and find out. Did
he have a big stick to beat off all of the admirers? And no, actually, has it provoked any conversations? Because the tops that we wear, they go to fund play dates and activities of families that can't afford them. But it's kind of like, an old band sweatshirt or an Arsenal top. If you go down the park and you see a fellow fan, it starts a conversation. There's something in common. So we've had guys that have been down the park with their kids on their own, and they've spotted another Soulie, and immediately you can go and start a conversation because you've got that commonality there. I'd be really interested to see. I think he lives sort of near West London. So what's it been like rocking Dad La Soul in West London?
Nice. Okay. Well, I will put that to him a little bit later on. Dan, thank you very much for mainly for the Dad La Soul update, but the Colin Hanks update was also really helpful and interesting.
I think it was priority. I think we need, like you said, more Colin. Actually, Colin Hanks has probably got a few other children spotted around, so I'll do some research, and maybe next time we can look at one of Colin's siblings to see what they've been up to.
The
There
Hanks
could be
update.
Keith. There'd be Colin. There could be Keith or
Keith,
Brian
yeah.
Hanks, or
What a load of Hanks coming to you
what a
next.
load of Hanks. But actually, think Tom Hanks. Multi-million billionaire movie star. Why couldn't he give his son a normal name like Chris Martin did, like calling him Apple or something like that? Why not? Has to be Colin. Nothing wrong with Colin, obviously.
No.
But, Nigel. Nigel as a name is dying out, isn't it?
It is, maybe if Tom, I'm not sure Tom's going to have any more children, but if he did, maybe he could help the resurgence of the Nigel. Maybe that would work out.
It sounds like Cockney rhyming slang, doesn't it? I'm just off for a Nigel Hanks.
And on the Apple theme, people said it was a bit strange at the time, but loads of Chris Martin's family members really liked it. His brother, his parents really liked it as a name. His Granny Smith, she liked it.
Ding!
Oh God, that's a joke I used to do on the radio about 15 years ago.
It's there in your little file of facts, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Chris Martin go.
Yeah. He's mentioned Apple. Everyone go in. This is it. This is your chance.
I've been waiting for this moment.
Thank you very much, Dan Flanagan, the Uber boss lord, and Grandpa Simpson. Dad LaSalle.
Lovely. Cheers, Jim.
Thank you very much to Dan for taking up more time than he was supposed to take up on this live stream. So without further ado, we've got our conflict management clinic coming up with Alex very soon. We've also got Sam Delaney, who's going to be chatting about mental health, about the men that he's spoken to on his podcast, the book that he's written as well. He worked for Lads Mags back in the day. He was the editor of Heat magazine as well. You'll have seen him on the telly. You'll have read his stuff in loads of different publications. He's on the way about 9 o'clock this evening. First of all, let's talk to Jacqui Champagne. Jacqui, hello. How you doing?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, yes. How are you?
Fantastic. Great, thanks. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Now, this is a fascinating thing that you're doing. You're doing like a kind of research project into depression in new dads, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the sort of background to that? Where did that come about from?
So I'm carrying out my doctorate degree at Royal Holloway University. So I'm training to become a clinical psychologist. And I've worked across a range of mental health services, actually across the NHS over the last few years. So working with adults, children, parents and things, carrying out lots of different types of sort of psychological therapies backed up by research and evidence as well. And then I guess in line with all of that, I've been doing some research and around sort of new fathers and sort of their experiences of their experiences after the birth. And following the birth essentially. So I guess, my experience working with parents over the years has sort of highlighted, that severe lack of attention and support that's given to new dads following the birth. So that kind of essentially led me on to doing my thesis and research in this area.
And so you've been talking to lots of dads, lots of new dads, and finding out their experiences, yeah?
Yeah. So, I mean, the design of the study has kind of essentially meant that there's been a survey, but, for anyone who kind of meets the sort of criteria that we've been looking for to carry out, the research, we will then have like a follow-up sort of discussion with them to talk through, just to give that opportunity to talk through their experiences a bit more, what they've sort of needed throughout the process following the birth, and also what support they might have received or might not have received, and then kind of using the time to, I guess, brainstorm and come up with some ideas as to what support might be useful for us to offer in the NHS, but also within the community as well.
Mm. So, I mean, is it too early to talk about findings so far, or are there themes that have cropped up that you think?
No, absolutely. So we're still in the early stages of it. So I'm still kind of going through a bit of a recruitment process. I had about 30 completed responses on the survey, which was more than I, could have really imagined, to be honest. I mean, the process itself has been quite challenging, as you can imagine. And I think it's been a huge learning curve for me in terms of, obviously realizing that, a lot of people don't necessarily want to come forwards for various reasons. But having had discussions with sort of 10 people at this stage, I can share some of the themes that have come out. We haven't done all the data analysis and stuff yet. But I guess, what sort of emerged is that obviously dads feel particularly, throughout the course of the birth and after, that point at which the midwives and the healthcare professionals and the healthcare visitors check in, arrange chats, visits, mostly sort of, if not solely targeted towards the mother. And I guess, what's come up is that obviously dads are, rarely checked in on, and not necessarily asked how they're doing. So, and those who do express their difficulties are either met with, uncertainty around where to signpost them, or they're put in touch with quite generic services and not sort of father specific services. So I guess inevitably that's just sort of reinforcing the idea that dads should be fine, and it's unusual to be going through any form of distress following the birth, and that they shouldn't need to seek out that support. So I think that's what's kind of being reinforced in this whole process. But and as a result, I guess that just stops dads from reaching out for help at all. So, but of course, the reality, is that having a baby is a huge life change, and it comes with a whole range of challenges and struggles, and that's inevitably going to affect some people's mental health and well-being, particularly if you've had a difficult upbringing yourself. So, yeah, so I guess that's kind of what's coming out of all of this, and I think it's just highlighting the need for more sort of targeted and quite tailored intervention support options for dads, whether that's across the NHS or within the community, or at least, more of a hub or a place that people can go to understand what is actually available. Because obviously Dad La Soul is one of many, not many, but a few community, organizations that are out there. But I think often people aren't aware of that at all anyway, and would benefit from some signposting of some sort. So yeah, I guess we're just trying to bridge some of these gaps in the research that we're doing.
Yeah, it is strange. It's one of those things where we are getting better at dealing with men's mental health, I think. From a lot of the conversations that we have within our group. But that's one area where it's still very much kind of mum focused. As soon as the baby's born, everything's on the mum. Because I remember my daughter was born 10 years ago this year now, but it was a long labor, and it was quite scary. There was a ventouse at the end, and it was one of those things like, right, we have to get the baby out now. And then about an hour later, they went, right, you've got to go. And I just had to come home in the late at night. And it's so weird to just go, oh, you'll be okay. Just go off and do it. And, and I was okay, but I might not have been okay, but there was no consideration. No one asked.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, that's another theme that has come up, is a lot of, not all, but a lot of the fathers who, have gone on to sort of experience some difficulties, have potentially had quite a traumatic birth, or, there were some complications. And, even with the mother sometimes having a C-section or cesarean, there's that initial period of a couple of weeks anyway, where they're not able to do that much because they're still kind of recovering from the procedure. So, it's quite a big demand on the father in those first couple of days or weeks or whatever. And yet, that midwife or health visitor is coming in to check in on, how mum's doing, but not sort of necessarily posing that question at dads. And I think even just that question in itself, just how are you, just to acknowledge that they might be struggling, not necessarily, but just posing that question, I think in itself can be really powerful, just to kind of acknowledge that, there might be some difficulty there.
Of course, yeah. So are you looking for anyone else for the survey at the moment, or is that...
We are looking for one or two more. So actually not many, but if anyone is interested in obviously taking part, it would be... it's on the flyer, which I think, Jim, you said you can circulate or share. Oh, yeah.
There you
go. Thank you.
As if by magic.
So there is a QR code on there, which you can just scan with your phone cameras, which will take you straight to the survey. Alternatively, the link is on there, I think, as well. But you're also welcome to email me, and my email address is at the bottom, in case you have any questions, or, I can also just send through the link if that's easier for you. But yeah, we're looking for a couple more. And like I said, the discussion can be as in detail or not, as you wish. And it's just, an opportunity for us to kind of brainstorm together and scope out what, useful support would look like whether that's in the form of therapy or web pages, testimonials, or whatever you think would be useful, essentially. So yeah.
Right. Well, what I'll do is I'll make sure with that goes out on our socials. Like I'll put it out tomorrow morning, and so hopefully some of our dadless holidays put in our private groups and stuff, and hopefully we will get some response to that as well. And would you come back on as well when you've analysed the data and done all the difficult like spreadsheet stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that would be a great opportunity. I think we spoke a bit about that the other day, but yeah, once the results come through and it's sort of written up, and I guess hoping to get it published hopefully as well. So yeah, there'll definitely be a process of sort of disseminating the results and sharing those findings. So it'd be great to come back on here and share that with everyone. So
yeah, I
yeah,
think I do think it'll be something that people are fascinated to see, and I think it's going to start some debates as well. And yeah, that's what we want, isn't it? An open dialogue about that kind of thing. Jacqui, thank you very much for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, so we go from that to conflict resolution. Alex is back with his clinic. I'm not rushing through this. It sounds like I'm rushing through this, but if I am, it's Dan's fault because he spoke too much about Colin Hanks. I mean, of all the topics. Alex, how you doing? You all right? Oh, you're silent. I can't hear you, Alex. Oh, Alex has got a microphone issue. Hey, there you go. Yes. Any strong feelings about Colin Hanks one way or the other?
No, I have no strong feelings at all, actually. But I will make one very quick comment off piste from what I'm talking about in relation to what Jacqui said. And it's interesting. In general practice, when your baby is 6 weeks old, you get invited in for the 6-week check. And that is a check on the baby and the mum. That's the NHS standard. There is no check on the dad. Right.
Okay. And has that been challenged at all?
To be honest, I've always, when I've had a new dad and I'm sitting there with a new dad, I always ask the dad how they're getting on. I make a point of doing it. But officially, the NHS doesn't regard the dad as requiring any support after the birth, bizarrely.
Right. Okay.
So that's something that's just opened my eyes, and I will probably contact Jacqui directly later because I'm interested in her research and her doctoral thesis. So yeah, I will. But it's worth asking. And any dads out there, if you have got your other halves and babies going to a 6-week check, go along. You're not welcome. You are very welcome, and you can always chime in. Anyway, sorry, that was not conflict. That was something completely separate, but I thought it was relevant.
No, it is, and that's great. That it's freeform. That's what we do, and actually, it's a fascinating topic. And I kind of wish we had more time, but we will come back to it when Jacqui's got that those results and stuff. And I think it is an interesting thing we do need to talk about as a society because it's weird that we don't do that when we're making great strides elsewhere. Okay, right. So we've asked for questions about conflicts, and you're the uber expert at answering them. First one is, what can you do when your missus isn't helping herself with the fundamentals of her health, like sleep, nutrition, and movement and that, and then starts airing her struggles in front of the kids with negativity such as, I've had no time to eat today, I'm not sleeping well halfway through the week?
People, particularly parents, will frequently put their health second to their kids. It's almost an instinctive thing to do. We look after the helpless, and we don't look after ourselves. What I would advise this dad to do is to have an open honest is not going to help us. It's our children if you are ill.
Yeah, of course. That's an interesting point, actually. It's about how we take on that responsibility and we shoulder it and we let ourselves struggle for that, because it's something that Sam, who's on in a bit, has a podcast, and he talked to Dan, our leader, about that very same thing. That was quite a theme of their conversation, and there's the taking the weight of the world on your shoulders, isn't there?
There is, exactly, and it's something that we naturally do, but it's about talking and saying, actually, we're a team. We both have to be firing on all cylinders, at least most of the time. And if one of us can't, then the other one needs to take over for that little bit, because we all have down days, we all have bad days, we all, are ill every so often. But actually saying things like, I've had no time to eat today, in today's modern society is a very scary thing to be saying, particularly if they're a young person, a really young person, as in preschool age, because that thought will stay with them and will reappear when they're in their early teens, potentially into an eating disorder. People may say that's a bit dramatic, but actually there's quite a lot of evidence out there that what kids see and hear in the preschool years can influence what happens later in life.
And it's not just when you say swear words in front of them when they're young and then they remember them and then embarrass you in front of people that you don't want to be embarrassed in front of.
That's mildly entertaining and embarrassing, but actually it's quite a bit more sinister than that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's true. You do. Yes, we have a family friend who is quite often talking about their weight in front, or in like an obsessive way in front of our children, and it's like, please stop that, because they don't need to think like that at all.
Exactly. I mean, again, we've gone slightly off the question here, but I've got a patient at the moment. She's a young teenage girl, and her father, he's fairly estranged from his family, sadly, but he once, when she was younger, called her fat, and she's the last thing from fat. She's underweight, and I'm desperately trying to get her over that at the moment, but it had a lasting impact on her, and that statement was made to her 5 years ago. She's now 13, 14 years old. So it's really important that for the children's sake, you don't say things like that. As I so frequently say on these sessions, it's all about communication. He's got to talk to his other half and say, you've got to look after yourself. After yourself, then you can't look after other people. It's a bit cruel, a bit tough, but actually it's the truth. That's the truth.
Okay. Another one. How do you face your parents when they constantly put you down and belittle you, which is on a theme? I want the kids to have a relationship with their grandparents, but I can't stand being around them.
Okay. I'm assuming this is the dad's own parents and not the in-laws. It's always slightly tougher with the in-laws as compared to your own parents. Why are they belittling? My usual experience of this is that grandparents don't think that you're bringing up their grandchildren the way they would bring them up. The problem is they last brought up children when that child was you, and that was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it might be. The world has completely changed. So again, as I always do, sound like a stuck record, you've got to sit down and talk to them. You've got to communicate with them, and you've got to say, look, I want them to have a really great relationship with you. And let's be blunt and honest about it. They're going to lose their grandparents before they lose their parents. So you've got less time to spend with them than I have. It's a bit tough, but actually it's the truth. And trying to drive them into under their son, then that will materialize into a quality of grandchildren. The two are not mutually exclusive. They've got to be together, inclusive together for it to work. And I'm guessing in this situation, there's some history. I don't know what, obviously, but I'm guessing there's some history. So that might need to be thrashed out as well.
Oh, no. Having to actually talk to people, that's is there no easier way?
Good job. So you get used to it.
Oh God. I mean, it's much easier if everyone just doesn't think about other people, and
Yeah.
that's probably the antithesis of your advice, right?
Yes.
Okay. What do you do about a neighbor who continually parks in front of your house when he has his own drive that he never uses? I don't, and I have to park down the road because he's outside my house.
Very short, simple answer is there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
If it's a public road and there's no parking restrictions, he's entitled to park there. It seems obviously whoever it is doesn't want to park on their own drive for whatever reason. There's, to be honest, not a lot you can do about it. I'm going to have to sort of semi-admit defeat here, unless you are able to, say to him, is there any reason why you don't park on your drive? Because it's, I don't have a drive and I have to park a long way away, but the point is he could turn around and say, well, if I don't park there, somebody else will. Well, yeah, that could be me, would be the answer to that one. But actually, parking with neighbours is a continual battle. I've seen it many times of flying around on social media. And actually, if the person's parking on the street, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So there's no point in going in all guns blazing. That's only going to make the situation worse. It's, if you have a relationship with your neighbour, try and drop it into the conversation somehow, and sort of, when it's chucking it down with rain, say, oh, it was a real shame I had to park all the way down the road, but, got soaking wet and I hadn't got my umbrella with me, silly me, whatever. Blame it back on yourself, but just make the person possibly think, hold on a second, he's got a car, he had to park down there because I parked there. But some people, you can be as subtle as you like and they'll never get it. But as I say, sadly, there's not a lot you can do about it, unfortunately. It is what it is. But the only way around it is the old C word again, communication and talking.
Right, okay. Thank goodness that was what the C word was. Okay, good. And this one, I've not sent you this one because this is entirely hypothetical. It's a completely hypothetical situation,
Yep.
Alex, okay? Completely. Not based in any sort of reality. What if there were two barbers in your village and you went to one of them because you found the other one really scary, but you used to go to the scary one and you went to the other one when that opened, but now that one's closed and the scary one knows you've not been there for ages because you went to the competitor. Completely hypothetical. As I might need a haircut at the moment, and potentially this situation might occur in a hypothetical. This has happened to me. What do I do? She's scary, and if I go back, she's going to know that I've not been there for years because I went to the other one.
The simple thing is to be absolutely open and honest about it, actually, and be brave and just go, hi. Now, and actually, I've come back to you because I always enjoyed being there. I wanted to try something different, wanted to go with someone else. Yeah. It's about how brave you feel. Yeah. I can sort of sympathise. I used to go to a hairdresser's. Now I don't. I actually go to a Turkish barber's. I mean, I don't have a lot here anyway. So, but it will be amazing for me to go back to the old barber because he knows full well. The only other option you have is, does the person actually know that you went to the other place, or do they just know that you didn't go to them?
She knows I've not been to her for about 5 years, and my hair's not 5 years long. So
no, but
in this hypothetical situation, the person that we're talking about,
what you could do is
this person could do
to say that they had a family member do it who's now no longer able to do it or moved away.
Oh yes, I could invent and kill off a family friend.
Well, either that or just not lie, but be economical with the truth. Oh, yeah, I had a friend who did it for me, but they've now moved away. Well, you sort of became friends with the barber you were with.
Yeah.
And they've moved away.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is good. Yeah. I mean, not me, so it doesn't matter, but it's just hypothetical.
But it's about being economical with the truth.
Right, okay, I could do that, definitely. Alex, once again, thank you very much. Will you come back next month and do more conflict management for us?
I absolutely will happily come back next month. And please, to all the dads watching, send them in. I will happily do my level best to give you advice, but it will frequently revolve around that infamous C word, communication.
C words, communication, not Colin Hanks and not anything else.
No.
It's been the theme of this show. Thank you very much to Alex. Right, we'll talk to Sam Delaney very soon. First of all, have a look at this.
I'm David. I help run the Worthing Dad's Night every now and again with Stuart. I also run the Worthing Dad's Meetups. I got involved about 2 years ago now. I met Dan online, and from there it's just gone from there, really. I help out whenever I can when I haven't got my little girl. I'd say Dadless Soul has helped me kind of build my confidence up more about doing it and kind of going out more. I think I was a bit wary when I was first a dad on my own, because I have my little girl on my own because she lives with her mother. But yeah, it's good from that. And my favourite Dadless Soul moment, I'd say it would probably be watching some of the dads come probably on their own and see them having a good time and kind of relaxing as well. Because obviously you get some of the dads that obviously when they first come are really nervous, and then seeing them relax and become like a better version of themselves, it's a brilliant thing to see.
So thank you very much to David. And what I want to do is get more of the Dadless Soul volunteers onto the Dadless Soul sessions every month. So we'll hear from some more next time. Right. Time to talk to our main guest today. He is a journalist, a broadcaster. He's a podcaster. He's written about a bazillion books. He's got a new one coming out, and he's Sam Delaney, and he's here. Hello, Sam. How you doing?
Hi, how you doing? I'm good, thanks.
Good. So thank you very much for coming on to the Dadless Soul sessions. It's sort of a payback for having our Dan on your Reset podcast.
Yeah, that was great. It was really enjoyable to meet Dan, and it was a really great episode, I thought.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And it's funny how these themes sort of come around. You know, Alex was talking about how we have a tendency to sort of take the world on our shoulders sometimes as men, as dads, and that seems to be a sort of theme from quite a bit of the podcast episodes that you do, certainly the ones that I've listened to. Have you found that kind of?
Yeah, fatherhood is a huge thing. It's a big theme in my book and often pops up in the podcasts, because I think that, you know, sometimes they aren't prepared. I don't think I was when I had my first kid, or my second one actually, like for quite how demanding it was and how difficult it was to continue to juggle the other aspects of your life and perform them to the standards that you were used to, or that you felt that you needed to, whilst also being a good dad. It's just very exhausting, very overwhelming. You kind of fall into the trap of thinking every other dad you've got, is doing it really well apart from you. So no one really shared about, God, I'm really struggling here. I was almost competitive when I was like a young dad. I was like, I wanted to be perceived as like this sort of expert dad. I really wanted to I've already been to the safari park this morning and ballet classes, and I'd done their French homework with them, and it was almost like competitive, like being a dad was like a new sport, and that really took its toll. And it was like sort of a mad way to approach it. And what I didn't do was do the opposite of that and go, God, it's really tough and boring and isolating sometimes, isn't it? And encourage other dads to open up about that. We're going back 15 years now when I was first a dad. And I think that, organizations like yours are really changing all of this. And I think there is much more honesty and openness. But certainly when I was first a dad, it was just like, and the other thing is, it's like, there's so much shame associated with struggling as a father, because you think two things. One is that most of us would acknowledge that however hard it is for a dad, it's going to be harder for the mum, especially in those early years. So you don't, part of me thought, I don't want to moan. Imagine how hard it is for my wife, And second of all, you just think, how does it look if I'm moaning about my obligations to my own fucking children, just to love my children? Do you know what I mean? Excuse my language. I don't know if we're allowed to swear or not.
Yeah, it's fine.
But But yeah, there was a lot of shame associated with struggling with fatherhood, as if it somehow suggested that you didn't almost love your kids enough. Certainly, these were the feelings that I had. And anyway, it was during that period, probably when I had my second child. So we had 2 small children, and I had a lot of other stuff going on. I had a lot of work going on because that's the other thing, driven sort of mad with anxiety and the idea of providing and taking on much more work and stress than was healthy, while simultaneously trying to really do the dad thing as best I could. And it all became overwhelming for me. And that was why I turned to drink and drugs to sort of try and self-medicate my way through it, because I wasn't able to share any of those stresses and strains with anyone. So yes, in answer to your question, fatherhood is extremely central to all the stuff I do about my own mental health and mental health generally.
And you were doing a lot of the childcare in those early years as well, weren't you? Is that right?
Well, I was freelance I've been freelance most of my career, and my wife at that time had quite a busy job in the West End, so I wasn't like full time. So my daughter would be at nursery and sometimes with a childminder, but I was certainly probably doing the lion's share of stuff, just by virtue of the fact that most of the time I was working at home. So yeah, it was a tough time.
And this kind of self-medication came during your years as a dad. Then that was part of the overwhelm that kind of led to it.
Yeah, I mean, the story of my kind of abuse of drugs and alcohol, it's really goes right back to when I was an adolescent, and I just grew up in, like so many of us grew up in, that sort of culture where it was very normal, run of the mill, to drink from a fairly early age to excess with your mates, and then as you got a little bit older, have the same attitude towards recreational drugs. And to be honest, because it was just so normalized, and I wasn't by any means like anywhere near the worst of my peers. I always say, never mind the worst, I wasn't in the Champions League places. I wasn't even in the Europa League places where it came to my social circle, right? And so I never thought it was really an issue. But I think that when my kids, when I had my son, so I had 2 quite young children, and I was taking on so much work, and there were so many different sort of stressful things going on in my life, and it all probably did stem from fatherhood, because I felt this responsibility. And and so the problem was that the drink and drugs that I'd always done in a sort of recreational way, and genuinely didn't see any problem in continuing that into my fatherhood years, because I didn't mean, it's not like I'm someone out train spotting. I was just going out 2-3 times a week, getting pissed, usually at the football at the weekend, and occasionally doing like a little bit of drugs at the weekend. But those things creep up on you, and the more overwhelmed and stressed out and exhausted I became, the more I started turning to those substances that had always seemed like a bit of fun to actually get myself through the stresses and strains of everyday life. I turned to it because I was unable to admit to what I was going through. I was also felt unable to just step off the whole, stop the world and just get off for a little bit and have a rest. So those were the 2 things I should have done. I now understand in retrospect. I should have been telling people what I was struggling with, and I should have gone easier on myself and found a way to take a step back and and treat myself a little bit more love and kindness. But I didn't do either of those things. I just started drinking and taking drugs all day, every day, secretly, right, and thinking that would sort of manage my mood and give me the energy and the wherewithal I needed to carry on doing what I was doing.
So how can we encourage dads who might be starting to feel that overwhelm to do what you should have done?
Well, I think the first thing is just acknowledging it to yourself, recognizing what you're going through. I didn't recognize it. I didn't allow myself to admit that parenting was very hard, very demanding, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And that combined with the pressures of career. In my case, I probably put a lot of pressure on myself to continue to be what I might have called like a Jack the Lad, or a bit of a legend down the pub as well, as if I was unwilling and unable to compromise any different aspect of my life, all of which I was living at kind of in sixth gear, you know. So the first thing is understand that, you know, your life is tough. Recognize that. Don't feel guilty about it. Ignore the voices in society that say things like, oh, first world problems. You're so lucky. You know, you've got a loving family and beautiful children, and you know, people are much worse than you. Of course, in practical terms, there are people much worse than you. But what I would say to that is, you know, no socioeconomic advantage, no familial advantage, no advantage in relationships or family incubate you from being a human being. You're a human being, whoever you are and whatever your circumstances are. And you are allowed to feel exhausted, miserable, anxious, because it happens to everyone. The important thing is recognize that. Don't feel guilty, because you should know that however together your peers look, they are going through it too, whether they tell you or not. And treat yourself with kindness. And your previous guest said something that I wholeheartedly agree with, which is if you don't treat yourself well, then you're not going to be the best dad you can be to your kids, or the best husband you can be, or the best friend or son or brother or anything. So the important thing is for you to be a little bit more selfish, recognize what you're going through, share it with people, and treat yourself with kindness, treat yourself with love, sympathize with yourself a little. That doesn't mean self-pity. What it means is just taking care. And if you want practical expressions of that, I genuinely mean just having a rest. I mean, a little thing that I wish I'd sort of done, which sounds like so banal and mundane, really, but it would have made such a big difference, is when I had 2 kids and my mortgage, my monthly mortgage was going crazy, and I was getting into debt. We bought a new house and got it renovated, and I was just like working more hours than possible in order to get through this all. What I wish I'd done is thought, this is so deeply unhealthy that I need to step away. I need to stop working so much. I need to actually spend more time at home with my wife and family, or just around people who love me. And if that doesn't seem financially feasible, because sometimes I know when you're caught in that sort of state of mind, you think, well, that's all very well, but I need to pay the bills. I would have stepped away, told people I loved what my problem was. They might have been able to talk it through with me and make better sense of it, because I wasn't admitting it to everyone. But also, and it sounds really straightforward, but I wish I'd just, rather than try to keep earning more, I wish I'd just found ways of like spending less or reorganizing my money. Do you know what I mean? Or just thinking, I'm going to have to, you know, kind of just work out a way of organizing myself differently. But I didn't. I just was running at the problem, thinking that I can just work and fight my way out of any corner I'm in. And ultimately, that's so short term, because it burnt me out. That attitude burnt me out. It led me to a crisis with alcohol and drugs. And if I hadn't gone and got help and got through that, then it, you know, who knows? It might have killed me. It might certainly have ended my marriage and my role as a father. So that's a good example. I came very close, and I you know, if I could go back in time and tell myself at that point, I'd be like, listen, nothing's more important at this stage than you actually just getting some rest, stepping away, addressing this situation, the lifestyle that is making you have to self-medicate to this degree. You know.
And you've now written about it. It's Sort Your Head Out is your book. It's out next month, is it? There you go.
There you go. It's out on February the 9th, and it's available to pre-order now in hardback, Kindle, and audiobook, which I have narrated. So yeah, it's called Sort Your Head Out: Mental Health Without All the Bollocks. And you know, it's part memoir and it's telling my story. But the intention of it is firstly just to share, so people might read it, relate to some bits in it. But the thing about talking about stuff like this in mental health is, in my opinion, there aren't that many revolutionary ideas when it comes to things like mental health and coping with anxiety and depression. You know, the stuff that you'll hear on some podcast with Fern Cotton now is not completely different to the ideas that Plato and the ancient Greeks were espousing all those years ago. The difference is, how do we express it? What language do we use? And I noticed when I started writing about this stuff in the newspapers about the things I've been through is that, you know, I have a very straightforward, blokey way of talking and communicating. That's just the way that I've grown up. I write with humor, even when I'm writing about quite bleak things. And I noticed that I got a good reaction from men like me, who were particularly the sort of men who were struggling to open up or engage in conversations about difficult subjects that were emotional to do with their feelings. And I think it's because of the way that people write and talk about these subjects. They're often off-putting, not to everyone, but off-putting to these sorts of blokes like me, blokes I go to the football with, blokes I grew up with. They didn't want the kind of self-pity and psychobabble that might be right for another demographic, but not for them. So all I wanted to do was write about all these ideas to do mental health and coping with the bad times in a very straightforward way with a bit of humour that wasn't going to be alienating to ordinary blokes.
And that's the thing, isn't it? There's very much like a kind of Instagram, floaty white cotton, patronizing American voice type attitude to a lot of mental health talk. But it is something that we should be normalizing. We should be talking, and I guess we are. I guess this is what we're doing, isn't it? And I think that's interesting because you're, especially for our kind of audience, who, I mean, you were part of that lad mad sort of thing in the 90s, weren't you? I mean, you were really at the kind of center of that, and that's the kind of the way that certainly I and a lot of people who are sort of our key audience all grew up experiencing that, and yeah, we don't talk in the floaty American way, but we talk, you know, and we're used to kind of people like you writing and reading, you know, things that you write, that James Brown writes, you know, and so it makes sense now that as we're all growing up and as we're all realizing, you know, we need to take care of ourselves, that we still want it communicated in that way we've always communicated it.
Yeah, I kept hearing all the time, oh, men really need to work harder at opening up, as if it was the fault of men for not being able to engage in those kind of conversations in that kind of language. And I thought, well, hang on, it's very important that men do address it. You know, we know the terrifying statistics about suicide amongst men in this country and depression and anxiety being so rife. So it's clear that men need to be encouraged to open up more. But if they're just being told, well, it's your problem because you don't know how to do it, then that's wrong. I thought what I wanted to play a part in doing was changing the language and the tone of the conversation to make it suitable for men. Not change it completely, because that floaty kind of Californian sort of hippy dippy language that you refer to, I've got no problem with. It's just not right for me or blokes like us, you know. And so I think that's fine, and it probably helps millions of people. Wonderful. But I thought there was a particular crisis amongst men just like me who'd grown up in this generation. And I just wanted to, yeah, you're right. I wanted to write and talk about it in exactly the same way that I'd written about football or music in the lad mags, or that I talked about football on TalkSport for years. You know, I wanted to apply the same tone, the same humor to sort of normalize it and disarm blokes who would ordinarily feel very awkward around that kind of chat.
What was it like in the 90s, you know, getting to write about football and music and do it in, you know, that kind of style that was very much you? And how?
Well, to be honest, the 90s for me, I joined the magazine industry in 97, so quite near the end. I was at university in the mid 90s in Sussex, and so I was swept up as a student in the kind of that era. Loaded magazine came out and kind of changed my worldview almost in 94, a couple of months before I started uni. And around the same time, you know, Britpop kind of took off, and you know, and the Euro 96 came a little bit later, and there was so many different exciting cultural phenomena going on. And what was interesting about it was, well, not interesting, what was exciting was that prior to that, I'd always loved magazines. I'd grown up being a bit of a magazine obsessive, but they always seemed to be, the magazines I read were things like The Face, that seemed to be about another world that was impossibly fashionable and glamorous, that I probably couldn't access myself, but reading about in magazines kind of, I found quite thrilling. When Loaded came out, I was like, oh, right, this is just about me and my mates. But this is elevating what we already, the sort of lives we already lead and the sort of interests we already have, which we thought were quite, not mundane, but we thought people sneered at, because they did used to sneer at it, right? In the 80s, like if you were into football and drinking lager, it was like a little bit, it was sort of thing that had the piss taken out of it. It wasn't cool. Loaded kind of actually took what we were already doing and how we were already living and sort of elevated it into something that was almost aspirational, which seems hilarious now, because I wouldn't want my son to aspire to that lifestyle, but still. And so basically by the time I graduated in 97, I'd gone off a career in politics, which is what I'd previously been aiming for. And I only wanted to work in magazines. And so I got involved in magazines towards the end of the 90s, but it was still absolutely booming. And magazine publishing in this country was huge. And even magazines that were considered unsuccessful were still selling like what amounts now that people would kill for, sort of thing. And it was wonderful, because what it did was it facilitated a lifestyle that actually I probably could. The interesting thing about the generation of blokes who I grew up with working on lad mags, because in the end, most of us were all like rotating around all the different titles at one point or another, was that I always say, we weren't paid that much. You didn't get paid that much really to be a young journalist on a magazine, but you were able to live a lifestyle that was that of someone who earned 20 times your yearly salary, because every door was opened, everything came free. Every weekend you had a different car that you'd been lent to drive around in, or a hotel that you could go and stay in to review. And, and it was probably unhealthy that this was my first proper grown up job doing that sort of stuff, because it kind of made me feel, well, right, this is just working life, is lots of free things and free drinks and pretty girls, all the time and all the rest of it. And, and I actually think, I mean, I was lucky, because as that sort of magazine world started to decline, and I sort of segued into broadcasting, newspapers, then broadcasting, writing books. So I kind of continued my career in that direction. But I do think that a lot of people from both the lad mags and the music press from that time really struggled, because when the sort of dream died, that was all they were kind of new. And suddenly the phone stops ringing and you're not getting free stuff all over the place, and you're not hanging around backstage at Glastonbury anymore. And that's very, very tough to deal with for people. So there was a big come down for a lot of people involved in that world.
Yeah, it's tough, because that's a lifestyle, isn't it? That's not just a job. That is a whole way of life.
And then it goes, and there's no way you can sustain it at all, because you were living the lifestyle of someone who earned £1 million a year. Yeah. Right. And you're not earning that amount. And so it died very quickly for a lot of people.
And then societal attitudes change as well. And it becomes, if you're used to doing something which I think we now see as quite outrageous. And I guess at the time, the point was that it was sort of outrageous, but not for the people reading it. It was that, but for everyone else, I guess. It was a bit on shock value. But I listened to the episode of The Reset you did with Nick Hancock, and there was an interesting bit about cancel culture in there.
Yeah.
And he talked about that on They Think It's All Over, when they used to just go in, and when the red light was on, they would just say whatever. And in looking back now, he was talking about how, oh God, these are real people we were talking about, but it just didn't seem it at the time. And there's talk of someone that he'd had a go at. His mum had sent a letter, and it kind of brought it a bit home to him there. Was there kind of any kind of comeuppance at the time from the sort of things you did in those magazines? Because I think nowadays, they're not going to be likely to exist nowadays, would they?
I think that my experience of men's magazines was, we're talking about, see, with those lad mags, there were different eras. When Loaded first came out, it was very smart, well written. It was a breath of fresh air. The writers were fantastic. they probably had as many famous, brilliant female writers as male ones, and they probably had more men on the cover than women. And people kind of group lad mags generally into one thing that I think is highly associated with the mags that came actually 10 years later with the launch of Nuts and Zoo. And
Right.
Nuts and Zoo was kind of like, it was almost like it felt like the most awful and inevitable end game of men's publishing, where everything that had been nice, everything that had been kind of smart and clever about something like Loaded in its initial incarnation when James Brown was editing it, had been sort of like reduced right down to its barest, most banal component parts, where it was just, here are some tits, right? Here are some tits and fast cars, right? Almost, I sort of felt that those magazines were effectively treating their readership with contempt, whereas Loaded, when it first launched, was really treating readers. It was sort of, it had the voice of a very intelligent working class person, right? Which was the sort of people that I knew and had grown up around, and working class people, especially ones who went to football and drank beer, had been regarded in popular culture as idiots to be laughed at, yobs, you know, dingbats and yobs, unsophisticated morons. And something like Loaded said, no, there's thousands of us all over the country who are intelligent, who love great books, great music, adventure, travel. You know, we are not the idiots that the Oxbridge snobs who run the rest of the media think we are. There was something really, really fantastic about that made you feel kind of empowered and excited to be who you were. But it did change. I was not really a fan of the portrayal of women as the mags became went more and more in that direction. In terms of a comeuppance for me, probably that was more when I segued into women's publishing. I was editor of Heat, which was in the noughties. And Heat was a different set of problems, but it certainly relates to what Nick said about the fact that Heat was a woman's magazine aimed at young women, which really thrived mostly on celebrity gossip. And the celebrity gossip, especially for that audience, I found out very quickly when I was the boss of that magazine. You know, you sold magazines off the back of contriving quite deep emotional drama and anguish in the lives of celebrities and splashing that on the front cover. And there were a lot of celebrities who were probably, in retrospect, you know, were going through hell anyway, and our reporting of what they were going through just made it worse. And you know, and there was people I knew from my other career in television who, by the time I was at Heat, had got quite famous. And I was often found myself caught between friends who I'd made when I'd been a television presenter and the people, and the same people were, you know, I was being brought stories by my news reporters that I knew would sell copies. And that really was one of the main things that made me question my position there, because I was like, oh, I can actually see the human impact of this stuff, and I'm not sure I feel comfortable with it.
Was there a lot of collusion as well, though? Was there people, because I would imagine there's the other half as well, is there, where people are going, look, I'm going to do this, can you come and
yeah, there's loads of that. You're right, there is loads of that. So I don't want to say, you know, it is wrong to suggest, it's not that we were just constantly going through people's rubbish or whatever it is that the tabloids used to do to contrive stories. Yeah, I mean, more than half would be celebrities either tipping you off or setting up stuff, or very often one of the most popular things was you'd collude with the celebrity to set up a photo shoot that appeared to be stolen paparazzi shots, but were in fact had been fairly meticulously choreographed between us as the magazine and the celebrities team. Yeah. Because if it looked like if it looked contrived, like an interview with a celebrity of a nice photo shoot on the cover where she's been shot in a studio and it's obviously all endorsed, sold a lot less. I mean, like a lot less than a picture that looked like it was taken on long lens and was slightly blurred through a bush of a celebrity being caught kissing the wrong person on holiday by the pool. That shifts 1 million copies.
Right.
But having the same celebrity with makeup on in a photo shoot in a studio might sell less than 500,000 copies. So it was the scandal and the mischievousness that shifted copies, and the celebrities knew that as well as we did. And they would often, I mean, honestly, you wouldn't believe the lengths that some celebrities went to. The other thing is they become addicted to coverage and they stop caring about whether that coverage is positive or negative. They just want to be in there. And I'm not joking when I tell you that I didn't have this myself, but there were members of my news team who said that, you know, celebrities would ring up and put on a voice pretending to be someone else reporting a story about themselves.
God. It's strange, isn't it? You do find that people thrive on. I mean, well, I guess that it's now a kind of career choice. The sort of Piers Morgans and the Katie Hopkins sort of thrive on that. What is the thing a decent person would say? I'm going to say the opposite and see what happens. And it's weird that I mean, for me, you know, God, I'd hate any controversy. If I ever I really hate any argument online. And if I get into it, I feel awful and like, I just want to stop this at all. But for them, they love it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I just think attention is addictive.
Right.
And I think that most humans have that in them. Attention is very addictive. And now, we live in a world where opinions are the quickest way to get attention. It was less the case when I was at Heat magazine. It was more just details of your private life that you could contrive. Mm-hmm. And then there was a shift where actually saying mental things was the thing that got you on the front cover, like of newspapers or what have you. But back then it was more like, is there something interesting and dramatic and painful going on in your private life? If there is, you can monetize it. Right. Yeah. But for everyone, listen, when I was at school, I was the class clown. And I was, and I look back, and even then, I'd be, if I said something out loud in class and it made everyone laugh, and the teacher said, if you do that again, you're in detention, I would fucking have to do it again, even though I knew I was going to be in detention, because I got a kick. It's almost like, you know, it's like what you get from anything, from getting likes on social media or whatever. It releases dopamine, attention. And celebrities get that on a high level, and they come to only value themselves on the basis of how much they're being looked at. And when they're not being looked at, they just think, well, that's it. I mean, I'm worthless, because it's all they've kind of been conditioned to judge themselves by. And therefore they go to greater and greater lengths to stay relevant and stay in the pit. I had celebrities come to me and say, oh, Sam, look, can you get me in the mag next week? And I go, well, I don't know, like how? And they go, well, listen, I tell you what, we had a page called What Were They Thinking, which is a very bitchy, but quite funny thing, where it's paparazzi shots of celebs, usually when they're going out on a Sunday morning in their tracksuit to buy a paper, just looking crap in like really awful outfits, right? And we'd just write snarky comments. So a bit mean, but, you know, not the meanest in the world, because it's all quite tongue in cheek. I remember a celebrity who I actually really like and really respect, and I bumped into her when I was doing a TV thing. She went, I tell you what, I haven't been in Heat for ages. I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to go out tomorrow morning. I'm going to put on like the shittest outfit I can find, get someone to snap me, and then you can put me in What Were You Thinking next week. I was like, okay. They said, just make sure there's a snapper near my house on Sunday morning. It's like, yeah, they're not getting paid for that or anything. They just think, I've got an idea to dress awfully and look really ugly, and you take a picture and then take the piss out of me in your magazine, because then at least I'll still be in the magazine, you know?
Wow. It is amazing, isn't it? There's a fascinating study to be done on that, I would imagine, on the mentality of that, which is absolutely fascinating. We're going to wrap up soon. But yeah, can I just say the Reset is a brilliant podcast, absolutely brilliant. It's fascinating stuff, and you know, it's basically you talking to a load of people about mental health, but once again, without the bollocks, right?
Yeah, that's it, really. Yeah, just all different sorts of blokes about their just experiences, and the thing is, it's just making it conversational. And it's not, I've been interviewing people my whole life, but I tried actually not to do these like interviews. I tried to make them like conversations, so the more natural stuff comes out. You never quite know what's going to happen from one episode to the next, but I'm blown away consistently by the willingness of all these different guests from so many different backgrounds and experiences to just open up. And it really defies that. We always sit around, like I've been doing it tonight with you, going, well, the thing about men is they just don't open up. They don't talk about it. But I'm going to have to stop saying it soon, because literally anyone I invite onto my podcast within 5 minutes telling me the lot.
Yeah.
And I've got no problem about talking about their vulnerabilities. But I think that's what that shows me, is as long as you present yourself as willing to listen and kind of, not judgmental, then blokes are very willing to open up. And so therefore, I think there's something to be learned from that for all blokes, is like, show your mates that you're available for that kind of conversation. Do you know what I mean? Just indicate to them, however you can, in a relaxed way, that you're up for it. It's normal. It doesn't have to be weird. It can be casual. And it's amazing then the extent to which men are prepared to start talking to each other.
It's an interesting thing. We found that we have a private WhatsApp group and a private Facebook group, and in there's some really in-depth chat, as well as having our dads only meetups as well. And I was talking to a psychotherapist that we work with a bit, and he was talking about how that is, those private spaces, those relaxed spaces, are where it's easiest to open up, and it's up because you create that kind of relaxed atmosphere, but in something that they know full well is going to be put out on the internet for people to listen to. But I think the atmosphere that you create gets them to open up. I mean, I don't know how much editing you do, but do
you know what? I do no editing whatsoever.
Right.
And the reason for that is I'm really lazy, and I make so many different podcasts every week. When I started doing this one, I resolved to just only do it on the basis of I press record when we start, I press stop when we end, and I publish the whole thing, unless someone specifically asks me to take a thing out.
Right. Okay. Because you get them to open up very quickly, which is, I mean, I guess you're a professional. You've been doing this many, many years, haven't you? But it's fascinating. It's well worth listening to.
I think people come to it and they know they might listen to an episode before, they might read some of the stuff because it's a newsletter too, and they just know that they're coming to somewhere where there isn't any judgment, and it's not going to feel weird or formal, like sitting with a bloody doctor or a shrink. And so people they wouldn't, what I mean is, I suppose they wouldn't even be there in the first place. I certainly don't pay them. So they wouldn't be there in the first place unless they wanted to open up. Maybe that's it. But anyway, I appreciate you saying kind things about it. Thank you.
Well, on that, I think Dan was expecting some payment. So
that's kind of why I snuck that in. It will come eventually. It will come eventually. Is all I can say. Yeah, once we start turning a profit.
So do definitely listen to the reset, listen to Dan's episode, and tell us about the book as well. Give you a pitch for the book. Why should people get hold of that?
This is a book about my struggles with addiction to drink and drugs, the stresses and strains of fatherhood, modern life, and how it all got on top of me as I was getting into my late 30s and approaching 40 fast, and how I managed to turn it all around, chiefly by just admitting to it, acknowledging the pain that I was going through, talking to people, and slowly getting better. Now I'm 8 years sober. I'm happier than I've ever been. My kids are happy to have a healthy, sober dad. My marriage is better. And really, I've just tried to tell a story of how all of that happened in here with a little bit of humour.
Brilliant. Sam Delaney, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. So we are back with the Dad La Soul sessions on the last Thursday of February. So make sure you're listening to that. We'll have another guest for you, Johnny Jensen, who is here to talk about training dads to be the best that they can be in all the aspects of their lives, which therefore kind of feed in to how good a dad they can be. If the rest of you, a lot like the kind of themes that we've been talking about tonight, I suppose. If everything else is there in a row, you can be the best dad you can be. And so I think it's going to be a fascinating session at the end of February. Make sure you're listening then. And thank you very much to all of our guests, to Jacqui, to Alex, to Sam. And make sure you follow us on all the social media